we're starting to see progress. And if we stick with it, if we don't flinch in the face of some difficulties, then I feel absolutely convinced that we are going to get this economy back on track.
Well, welcome back to Hardball. That was the president earlier today, obviously better than a stick in the eye. He was sounding optimistic after meeting with his top economic advisors. And in another positive sign, a Wall Street Journal survey shows most economists say the recession will end in September. Has the economy turned a corner? Joining us now, Joshua Cooper Ramo, author of The Age of the Unthinkable, Why the New World Disorder Constantly Surprises Us and What We Can Do About It, and the New York Times' John Harwood, who's also the CNBC chief Washington correspondent. Joshua, a few days ago, I saw the President of the United States telling me that if I bought a Chevy, my car warranty was going to be covered. No problem. Don't worry about it. Yesterday, I believe, I saw him telling America that, now is the time to go out, refinance your house, get the lower interest rate, get a fixed rate mortgage for, 20, 30 years. Is the president at risk here of becoming too involved as a spokesman for an economy that still has huge question marks to it?
Well, I think he doesn't have a choice. He needs to talk up the economy, but you're right that he's trying to identify exactly sort of the fault line of how much of a booster he can be, because the reality is, as you point out, his credibility is on the line here. It's not simply the policies, but it's his own word. And if this crisis gets worse, when people want to turn for him for explanations, he's got to maintain that credibility. The one thing we know is that we're living in this networked world today. One of the points in my book, The Age of the Unthinkable, is the reason we're constantly hit with unthinkable surprise is that problems anywhere on the network can propagate to anywhere on the network. So the fact that we live in a world where China is still a huge question mark, where there's European countries that may default this year, where it's not clear what the consumer credit crunch in the U.S. is going to look like 5 months down the line, makes it very hard to be conclusively optimistic. So I think the president is trying to get as close as he can to being positive, but walking very carefully along that line where his credibility is at jeopardy.
Here's another clip. John Howard, listen up to this one. President Obama's chief economic advisor, Larry Summers, is also sounding optimistic.
I think the sense of a ball falling off a table, which is what the economy has felt like since the middle of last fall, I think that is going to. I think we can be reasonably confident that that's going to end within the next few months, and that you'll no longer have that sense of free fall.
Okay, John, you're coming at this issue with the New York Times hat on and a CNBC hat on. Can you give me any sense of what the relationship is with Geithner, Tim Geithner, Secretary of Treasury, Larry Summers? Who is running the shop here? Is everyone running it? Is there any one central voice here? Who does the president listen to most, do you think?
It's an interesting question. Larry Summers is head of the National Economic Council. You talk to people who were involved in economic policy making, they'll say that Larry Summers is the smartest guy in the world on this stuff, and yet Tim Geithner became the Treasury Secretary, a job that Larry Summers had some interest in. I think the president probably listens to Larry at the end of the day more so than Tim Geithner, but, that's hard to say. They're both in the room, and Tim Geithner has certainly seemed to have turned the corner in the last few weeks in terms of public perception of how he's doing. Larry was sort of understated there in talking about, the president's talking about signs of hope. Larry says the ball's not going to be falling off the table anymore. That's a little bit different tone. But I think the balancing act the president has to strike has to do with talking up what's good about the economy without ignoring the fact that unemployment is 8.5%. 5 million people have lost jobs in this recession, and more are going to lose their jobs. That rate's going to go up. So even as the economy is coming back, joblessness is going to be a lagging indicator, and that's going to be a political problem for him as he tries to talk up what's good.
So, Joshua, off of what John said, unemployment climbs maybe to double digits by the middle of the end of the summer. Credit card defaults rise in May, June, and July because people have loaded up so many normal expenses onto their credit cards they can't pay them. We have that indicator going. Do you think, with what we watch today on cable TV and in the newspapers every day, and of course it's the #1 topic in Washington, is it possible to pay too much attention to the daily fluctuation of the Dow Jones average?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Dow Jones is a terrible indicator of the health of the economy for all sorts of reasons, not least of which, as we've seen over the last 12 months, that the behavior of financial actors and financial instruments is largely uncorrelated with the needs of the overall economy. We've had this tremendous recovery in the Dow, but that's a long way from having a tremendous recovery in the economy. The reality is, as you just pointed out, on those and a long list of other concerns, we have yet to see the full impact of this recession hit. And the lesson of living in this world is that as those things start to come online, each one of those introduces a new peril. And so focusing on the Dow is fine, but it doesn't give you a lot of information about what the next 8 or 12 months are likely to look like.
Hey, John, and Mike, if I could just add on that, if the Dow were a great indicator, the fact that it hit 14,000 in October 2007 might have told us we were headed for some good times, right?
Yeah.
That was not happening. And so oftentimes the Dow reflects the mood, the emotion of the moment, but has very little predictive power.
Well, here I am attempting, to put a smile on people's faces who have lost so much over the past 6 or 7 months, John, and I'm going to ask you a question that, maybe you can't answer, but is it possible that the president speaking as he has spoken, and Larry Summers in the clip that we just heard, is it possible that they have a few more signs that are brighter than we've come to realize in the daily public prints? I mean, is it possible that the bank stress tests show much more strength in the financial services industry than we've been led to believe?
Well, I think it's going to show some, and look at those Wells Fargo numbers yesterday. Those were certainly encouraging, but people at Treasury tell me that some of the bank stress test results are going to be ugly. So I think we're going to see some ups and downs, and there's a debate going on right now over whether we're seeing, in effect, a dead cat bounce in terms of the Dow, that it's going up but headed to go back down again before we're conclusively in a recovery. So I think it's hard to draw some of those conclusions, but the bank stress tests at the end of April are going to be an interesting sign about whether or not that recovery is broadly reflected in the results for those 19 banks, and maybe some of those banks won't need as much public money as anticipated when we started this process.
Hey, Joshua, off of something that John Harwood said earlier in this segment, how important is it to the financial system, specifically to Wall Street, the dreaded Wall Street, how important is the cosmetics of the presentation? In other words, Tim Geithner's presentation, which is markedly improved over the past 2 or 3 weeks compared to what it was a couple of months ago. How important is that?
Well, it seems to matter a lot, and it's a symbol of something else that's very important, which is the fact that we're missing, to some degree, what's going on here. This is not a crisis of the Dow. It's not a subprime crisis. It's not even a financial crisis. The reality is what we're facing is a much broader existential crisis, that we've arrived in a world that is fundamentally so complex that our old institutions are no longer able to manage it or control it or even predict what's likely to happen. At the highest level, that's the reason our society has to be re-engineered to some degree. It's the reason our regulatory institutions have to be reinvented. I think Obama understands this. His goal is to get us to a place of basic stability where we can begin that re-engineering. I think the Dow movements are really irrelevant. I think what's important for people at home, you talk about putting a smile on the face of people who've lost all this money, the reality is this is not a time to smile. This is a time to prepare for the fact that there is a likelihood this is going to get much, much worse before it gets better. And that really should be the primary agenda right now. Preparing people, making them more resilient for the fact that there are many, many risks that lie ahead of us.
Joshua, what are the odds that I won't be able to pay for my Red Sox season's tickets in 2010?
Do you still pay for your Red Sox season tickets?
Yeah, I do.
I think you'll be okay.
Oh, thanks.
Don't flinch now, Barnacle.
Puts a smile on my face, John.
Yeah, exactly.
John Harwood, Joshua Cooper Ramo, thanks very much.